Hey everyone, welcome. Today, we're going to dive into the incredible world of the Aztecs. We're going to take a look at how their entire society was built and, what really held it all together.
All right, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with their belief in omens and the emperor's power. Then we'll work our way down that social pyramid to see how everyday people lived. And finally, we'll get to the heart of it all, the core beliefs that made the whole thing tick.
Okay, let's set the scene. The year is 1519. We're high above the massive, bustling capital city of Tenochtitlan, and the Aztec leader. He's watching the night sky, looking for signs, and what he sees absolutely terrifies him.
So this is Emperor Moctezuma. And you gotta understand, for the Aztecs, the emperor wasn't just some guy in charge. Nope. He was their direct line to the gods, and it was his job, his huge responsibility, to read the signs and figure out what the future had in store. This right here tells you everything about how the Aztecs saw the world. See, this star Serpent, this comet, wasn't just some cool thing to look at in the sky. To them, it was a terrifying message. They believed the universe had already been destroyed 4 times. And this comet was a sign that their world, the world of the 5th sun, was about to meet its own violent end. You can just imagine the fear that spread through the empire. So who exactly was this man with the weight of the world, literally, on his shoulders? Let's zoom in a bit and really look at what it meant to be the Aztec emperor. The Aztecs called their emperor the Huitlatolani, and that's pronounced Huitlatowani. It literally means great speaker. And yeah, he was treated like a living god. But get this, and this is super important, you didn't just inherit the job because your dad had it. A council of nobles actually chose him, which meant you had to be the absolute best of the best to even be considered. He basically had to juggle 3 huge jobs at once. First, he was the commander-in-chief, a top-notch warrior who led the entire army. Second, he was the head of state, the one who made all the final calls for the empire. And third, he was the chief priest, responsible for understanding the god's will, just like Moctezuma up on that roof watching that comet. Now, what's really fascinating is how this one super powerful guy sat right at the very top of this incredibly rigid, very clearly defined social ladder. So, Aztec society was pretty much broken down into 2 main groups. You had the nobles, who were about 10 to 15% of the population, and then you had the commoners, which was, well, pretty much everybody else. And way up at the very top, in a class all his own, you had the emperor. For the most part, you were born into your class, and that was that. But there was one major way you could move up in the world: the battlefield. If a commoner was an amazing warrior, especially if he captured enemies for sacrifice, he could actually earn the status of a noble. Bravery in war was the one true key to climbing that social ladder. Sure, the nobles and the emperor had all the power, but it was the commoners who were the real engine of the empire. So let's take a look at this huge group of people and see how they organized their day-to-day lives. The basic building block of life for a commoner was the kalpoli, pronounced kalpoli. You can think of it like a neighborhood clan or a really tight-knit community. These groups owned land together and would hand out plots to different families. But they were also the economic engine of the whole empire. Each kalpoli was responsible for paying taxes to the emperor, which kept the whole system running. It really gave everyone a sense of belonging. And right at the center of the city, you had the incredible Tlatelolco market. This place wasn't just for shopping. It was the social and economic heart of the entire empire. It was this buzzing, vibrant center of daily life, and honestly, one of the biggest and most organized markets in the entire world at the time. I mean, when the Spanish conquistadors showed up, their jaws just hit the floor. This quote from one of the soldiers really shows how stunned they were. They compared it to the massive markets in Rome and Constantinople and said they just never seen anything like it. On a busy day, this place could hold up to 60,000 people. Just try to imagine that. So how did they pay for stuff? They didn't have coins like we do. Instead, and this is my favorite part, their currency was the cacao bean. Yes, the same beans used to make chocolate. As you can see, a nice cloak would set you back about 100 beans. It's just a fascinating system where your money was something you could literally eat. Now, in a huge, crowded society like this, it was absolutely crucial that everybody knew their place. And this social order wasn't just a suggestion, it was super rigidly enforced by strict laws and a really unique education system. You could literally tell someone's social status just by looking at them. These laws dictated what you could wear, the fabrics you could use, and even how many floors your house could have. And just look at the punishment, under pain of death. They were not messing around.
And this whole system of social division, it started young. Amazingly, education was mandatory for all Aztec children, which was way ahead of its time. But the kind of school you went to depended completely on your social class.
So if you were a noble kid, you went to a school called the Kalmakok. This was like the elite prep school. Here, you'd get a serious education in stuff like astronomy, law, and how to read the sacred texts. You were basically being trained for the top jobs in the empire, the next generals, priests, and government officials. Commoners, on the other hand, went to a different school, the Telpoch Kali. Their education was way more practical, more hands-on. Instead of law and astronomy, they learned the skills they'd need to be farmers, artisans, and, most importantly, soldiers. This two-track school system was designed to keep that social pyramid rock solid for generations.
All right, let's tie this all together. What was the big idea, the core belief system that powered this super-structured and disciplined empire?
The whole point was to raise citizens who had a stone heart and a stone face. Now, that sounds harsh, but what it really meant was being courageous, self-sacrificing, and incredibly disciplined. From the time they were little, kids were taught to put the needs of the community, the good of the Aztec state, way above their own personal feelings or wants.
You know, this whole idea of a rigid social structure, all defined by very clear status symbols. It leaves us with one final thing to think about. For the Aztecs, it was all about feather cloaks and two-story houses to show off your rank. So what do we use today? Designer clothes, fancy cars, the newest phone? When you think about it, how different are our modern status symbols, really? Definitely some food for thought.
Okay, I want you to close your eyes for a second. Just transport yourself back to the year 1519. You're standing on this huge, flat palace roof. It's nighttime. The air is cool. It's thin because you're way up in the mountains of central Mexico. And below you is Tenochtitlan, a city that's literally floating on a lake, just shimmering.
It's a scene that, you know, when you describe it today, it feels almost like science fiction. You've got canals instead of streets, these towering pyramids painted bright red and blue, and this almost total silence in a city of, what, 200,000 people?
And right there, standing next to you on this roof, is Moctezuma II. This is the most powerful man in the Americas. I mean, he's treated like a living god, but he is not up there enjoying the view, is he?
No, not at all. He's terrified. He's looking up at the night sky, and he sees what the Aztecs called a star serpent.
A star serpent?
We call it a comet today. It's just streaking across the darkness with this fiery tail. And for Moctezuma, this isn't just, you know, astronomy. It's a message.
This is the part that always gets me. We have this image of the Aztecs as these, like, fearless warriors, right? Just conquering everyone. But here's the guy at the absolute top, and he's trembling because of a comet.
It sets such a specific mood, doesn't it? To really get the civilization, you have to understand that anxiety. They believed they were living on the edge of the apocalypse every single day. There were those reports of the lake turning red like blood. People were saying they could hear a woman wailing in the night, which is actually the origin of the La Llorona legend.
No way.
Yeah, so Moctezuma was just convinced the universe was completely unraveling.
That context is so important because for today's deep dive, we have a very specific mission. We got a request to break down Aztec society. Not the myths, not just the blood and guts, but how did it actually work?
Right.
Basically, if you had to teach a grade 8 class everything they need to know about this civilization, what would you tell them?
It's a great challenge because to explain it to a student, or I mean, anyone, you have to look past the human sacrifice headlines and see the structure underneath. This was a society that was obsessed with order. They had laws for everything because they genuinely believed that if they let chaos in, the sun would just stop.
So let's build this ultimate study guide then.
Yeah.
If we had to put a bumper sticker on the whole Aztec Empire, a central philosophy that explains everything from their schools to their laws, what would it be?
For the good of the people.
Okay, that sounds pretty nice.
It sounds nice, almost democratic, but in practice, it was intense. The group always matters more than the individual. Your personal happiness, irrelevant. Your duty to the whole. That was everything.
Okay, so let's start at the very top of that pyramid. We mentioned Moctezuma. We always call him the Emperor, but that's like a European term we just pasted on him. What was he actually called?
In their language, Nahuatl, his title was Huey Tlatoani, and it translates to the Great Speaker.
The Great Speaker. Huh. That suggests his job was more about communication, not just ruling.
Exactly. He was the voice of the state, but he was also the voice that spoke to the gods. And, unlike European kings at the time, like Henry VIII Moctezuma wasn't just guaranteed the job because of his last name.
Wait, hold on. I always thought royalty was hereditary. You're saying he was elected.
He was, yeah. It wasn't, a democracy where all the farmers voted or anything. But there was a high council of nobles, and when a ruler died, they'd look at the royal family and they'd ask, who is the most capable? They could pick a brother, a nephew, a son. They wanted competence, not just a bloodline.
It seems incredibly high stakes. I mean, if you pick the wrong guy in Europe, maybe you get a bad war, high taxes. But if you pick the wrong guy in Tenochtitlan,
the universe could collapse. The Huey Tlatoani was the chief priest, the commander-in-chief, and the head of state. So if the reigns failed, that's on him. If the army lost, his fault. I mean, he lived in unbelievable luxury. He had servants sweeping the ground before he even stepped on it, but the psychological burden must have been immense.
so that's the peak. What about the rest of the mountain? You had this really strict divide between the haves and the have-nots.
The nobles and the commoners, the Pipilton and the Miswalton. And in a city that big, you had to know who was who instantly. You couldn't just ask for ID. So they used fashion.
This is one of those details that sounds like trivia, but is actually so important. The sumptuary laws, which basically means the fashion police could execute you.
It wasn't just a fine, no. If you were a commoner and you wore clothing made of cotton, you could be put to death.
Wow.
Cotton was for the nobility. If you were a regular person, a farmer, a fisher, you wore clothes made from maguey fiber.
Maguey. It's a cactus fiber, right?
Yeah, from the agave plant. It's rough, it's scratchy, but it's durable. It's like you're wearing a burlap sack while the guy next to you is in, like, soft cotton. And this applied to housing, too. Commoners were forbidden from building a second story on their homes.
But why go to that extreme? Why kill someone over a cotton shirt?
It goes right back to that fear of chaos. If a commoner can dress like a noble, the whole hierarchy starts to dissolve. If the hierarchy dissolves, the gods get angry. It was all about visual order. You had to be able to look at a crowd and know in a second where everyone stood.
But there were some people who kind of blurred those lines. I want to talk about the merchants, because in most ancient societies, merchants are just, guys who sell stuff.
Yeah.
Here, they sound like characters from a spy novel.
The Pochteca. They are fascinating. So technically they were commoners, but they were often richer than a lot of the nobles. They ran these enormous trade caravans to the farthest corners of their world, like down to the jungles of what is now Guatemala.
And when they came back, they weren't just bringing goods.
No, they were bringing intel. They were basically state-sponsored spies because they could just walk into enemy cities to trade. They'd be mapping fortifications, counting soldiers, noting where the water supplies were. Then they'd report all of it back to the Aztec generals.
That's incredibly risky. I mean, if you get caught, you're dead.
High risk, huge reward. And that's why the state let them get so wealthy. But even then, they had to be careful. If a merchant started flashing his cash too much, the nobles would get jealous and suspicious. So they'd dress poorly in public and hide their gold inside their houses.
Speaking of gold, that's another big misconception we need to clear up for our study guide. When the Spanish showed up, they were obsessed with gold. But for the Aztecs, gold wasn't the most valuable thing.
Oh, not even close. Gold was nice, sure. They called it the excrement of the gods, which kind of gives you an idea of how they viewed it. Pretty, but earthly. The real prize was feathers.
Feathers.
Specifically, the iridescent, shimmering turquoise tail feathers of the Quetzal bird. This bird only lives in high cloud forests. Its feathers change color in the light. To the Aztecs, that shimmer was proof that it was divine. It was directly associated with their god Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent. A shield or a headdress made from those feathers was worth an absolute fortune.
Okay, so we have this very strict layer cake of a society.
Yeah.
Nobles on top, commoners on the bottom. But here's the aha moment for anyone trying to get the Aztec mindset. It wasn't totally frozen. You could move up.
You could. It was rare, but it was possible. And there was really only one way up that corporate ladder: war.
The warrior's path.
This was a military society through and through. Every single boy was trained to fight, and they had a very, very clear metric for promotion. And it wasn't about killing people on the battlefield. In fact, killing an enemy was seen as kind of a waste.
Right, because the goal was taking prisoners for sacrifice.
Exactly, live prisoners. And it was, in a very grim way, gamified. If you managed to capture 4 enemies in battle, you crossed a threshold. You were elevated from your commoner status. You could join one of the elite military orders, the Eagle Warriors or the Jaguar Warriors.
And it came with perks, I'm assuming?
Huge perks. You could drink alcohol, which was strictly forbidden for almost everyone else. You could wear fine jewelry, eat meat more often. You basically became a made man in the empire.
Let's shift gears for a second, down to the neighborhood level. Because most people weren't Jaguar warriors. They were living in these family clans called the Calpoli.
Yeah, you can think of the Calpoli as like a cross between a clan and a city war. You'd live with your extended family or with people who shared your trade, so you'd have like a whole neighborhood of goldsmiths or feather workers. And this is actually where the system had a surprising little pocket of democracy.
Democracy.
In this empire.
At the local level, yeah. The commoners actually elected their own captains and a council to manage the neighborhood. They were in charge of the land and, crucially, for cleanliness.
I read about the street sweepers.
Tenochtitlan was spotless. I mean, while European cities in the 1500s were literally knee-deep in sewage, the Aztecs employed 1,000 men just to sweep and wash the streets of the city every single day. And the Calpoli organized all of that.
Okay, let's get to the part that every grade 8 student is going to ask about. School. If I'm a kid in 1519, do I have to go?
You absolutely do. And this is a massive distinction. The Aztecs had universal mandatory education for everyone.
For everyone. Boys, girls, nobles, commoners, no exceptions. This was centuries before that concept ever took hold in the West. They believed the state could not function unless every single person was molded into a proper citizen.
But they didn't all go to the same school.
Right.
It was still divided.
Right. It was segregated. If you were a noble, you went to the comet. Think of that as their university. You learned to read and write the glyphs, which was basically a secret code for the elite. You studied astronomy, theology, law. You were training to be a leader.
And the commoner school.
They went to the Telpoka. And there was no reading or writing there. All the instruction was oral. So you'd memorize history, myths, but mostly it was about physical toughening. Military drills, carrying heavy logs, digging ditches for public works.
I came across this phrase they used to describe the goal of this education. They wanted to create a child with a stone heart and a stone face.
It's such a powerful image, a stone heart and a stone face. And it doesn't mean being cruel, it means being stoic, self-controlled. They wanted to create citizens who would not crack under pressure.
And the discipline to get them there.
Yeah.
We have to talk about chili peppers.
Yes. This is the detail that always shocks people. If a child was rebellious or lazy, the parents or the teachers had a very specific punishment. They would roast dried chili peppers over a fire and hold the child over the smoke.
So they were essentially tear gassing their own kids.
It sounds horrific to us, and it is. But in their worldview, they were saving that child. Remember, this is a society with the death penalty for what we'd consider minor infractions. If you raise a brat, he grows up to be a criminal and then he gets executed. So the chili smoke was this harsh correction now to prevent death later.
That is tough love, taken to the absolute extreme. What about the girls? You said the education was universal?
Yep. Girls went to school until they were married, usually around 16. And they learned domestic arts. For sure, weaving was economically vital. But they also learned religion. And women had career paths. They could become priestesses. There were also the midwives and the doctors. The Aztecs had a really advanced understanding of herbal medicine, and it was women who were the primary keepers of that knowledge. So they weren't just staying home. They were integral to the city's health.
So you finish school, you have your stone face, you head out into the city, you'd probably end up at the market. And the market at Tlatelolco, this wasn't just like a grocery store.
Oh, it was a spectacle. When the Spanish soldiers first saw it, they were just stunned. Some of them had been to Rome, to Constantinople, and they said Tlatelolco was bigger and better organized. We're talking up to 60,000 people trading on a single day.
60,000, that's a modern football stadium.
And it was quiet, or at least incredibly orderly. Goods were all organized by section. Gold over here, feathers there, pottery, chocolate.
And the currency system is so fun. No coins.
No coins at all. They used cacao beans, so chocolate for small change. I'll give you 30 beans for that rabbit. But for bigger purchases, they used standardized cotton cloaks.
We have a price list from the sources, don't we?
We do. A standard cotton cloak was worth about 100 cacao beans. A dugout canoe. That would be one cotton cloak.
And a slave who could sing and dance.
That would be 40 cotton cloaks.
That tells you a lot about what they valued. But the thing that really blows my mind about the market is the justice system. It couldn't have just been a free-for-all.
No, not at all. They had a police force patrolling the aisles, and right there, in the middle of the market, was a courthouse. 12 judges sat there from sunrise to sunset. If someone cheated you or stole your beans, you dragged them right to the judges. They heard the case on the spot, and the sentence was immediate.
Wow. Okay, so that brings us to the legal system as a whole. Strict society. And no prisons, really.
Not in our long-term sense. You didn't get 10 years. You got fined, you got enslaved to pay off a debt, or you were executed.
But here's the twist. The one thing I really want people to take away from this. Usually, in history, the rich and powerful play by different rules. They get away with things. In Tenochtitlan, it was the exact opposite.
The reverse double standard. It's so unique to the Aztecs. A noble was punished more severely than a commoner for the exact same crime.
Explain that. Why would the people in power write laws that would hurt themselves more?
Because of that whole great speaker concept, the nobles were the ones educated in the comicac. They represented the state. They were supposed to be the role models. So if a commoner got drunk in public, it was bad. Maybe they'd get their head shaved as punishment. If a noble got drunk in public, they could be beaten to death for it.
Because their corruption was a threat to the cosmic order itself.
Exactly. A drunken commoner is just a drunk. A drunken noble is a sign that the whole government is rotting. And if the government rots, the sun stops moving.
That is actually kind of refreshing. Brutal, but refreshing. And finally, we have to touch on slavery, because that word slave, it conjures up images of the American South. But this was different.
Very, very different. It wasn't based on race at all. It was usually based on debt or just bad luck. If you went broke, you might sell yourself to slavery to survive. But you kept certain rights, you could own property, you could even own other slaves. You could get married.
And what about your kids?
Born free. Slavery was not hereditary. It was a temporary status for one person. And there was this incredible rule, the escape clause.
I love this story. Paint the picture.
Okay, so you're a slave being sold in the Tenochtitlan market. You aren't tied up. If you decide to just make a break for it, and you manage to run out of the market and make it all the way to the Emperor's palace, about 1.5 miles away, and you step inside without being caught, you are legally free.
And the catch is, who's allowed to stop you?
Only the owner or his sons. If anyone else, a guard, another shopper, tries to tackle you, they get punished for interfering with the will of the gods.
It's like a divine obstacle course. The public just has to stand there and watch you run.
It must have turned the market into a spectator sport. But the belief behind it is pretty profound. If you have the spirit and the speed to make it all the way to the palace, then the gods must want you to be free.
So, we've built our study guide. We've got the elected emperor, the spies in the marketplace, universal schools with the chili smoke, and these strict laws that hammer the rich harder than the poor.
It's just such a complex picture. It's so easy to dismiss them as just the people who did human sacrifice, but they were trying to engineer a perfect society. They valued clean living, modesty, courage. They really believed that if everyone did their job, from the street sweeper to the emperor, the world would keep turning.
It really challenges our modern idea of freedom. You know, we obsess over individual rights. They were obsessed with collective survival.
That's the core tension right there. And honestly, it leaves us with a really provocative question.
What's that?
Well, we talked about that reverse double standard, the idea that leaders should suffer more for their mistakes because they hold more power. Just imagine if we applied that today. Imagine a world where a CEO or a politician faced harsher sentences than a regular citizen for the same crime, just because they were expected to know better. How would that change our leadership?
It would certainly change who decides to run for office.
Yay!
It turns leadership from a privilege into a terrifying burden.
Just like it was for Moctezuma standing on that roof.
That is a lot to think about. Whether you're in grade 8 or just trying to make sense of history, the Aztecs definitely have a way of getting under your skin. Thanks for diving in with us.
My pleasure.
We'll see you on the next deep dive.